Okay, so we're gonna make some cheeseburger soup. I'm gonna do this in small parts. So the first part that I'm gonna do right now is just to slice some celery. We're gonna kind of think about bite-sized pieces because this is gonna go into a soup. You can notice here that I am cutting 4 pieces of celery at one time. I'm just trying to save time. I'm trying to be efficient. As I get to some of these whiter pieces at the end, I'm going to cut them in half, just so they're not quite so big when they go into the soup. Next, I'm going to chop my onion. Take the root and the stem end off and then cut it down the center this way. I don't waste my time trying to peel all the papery stuff off of the outside of the onion until I give myself a little corner to get my fingernail underneath so that I can easily pull off that first layer that we don't want to use. Again, trying to make yourself as efficient as possible. And then because we're just chopping this onion, I'm going to cut this direction and then just turn the direction that I'm cutting. I hold both sides because a lot of times when you're slicing down in and you lift your knife up, it'll pull up one of these slices of the onion. Okay, repeat on the other half. Next, I'm going to peel and chop some potatoes. Again, thinking about kind of bite-sized pieces, something that would fit on your spoon. You really don't have to peel the potatoes if you don't want to. There's a lot of nutrition in the skin. So I'll probably not peel some of them and then I will peel a few others just to show you how to do that. Of course, you could use a vegetable peeler like this, and that would go kind of like this. The key thing here is to remember when you've got your fingers wrapped around right here, you got to be careful you don't catch your fingertips with the peeler. And then, of course, as you get less skin on the outside of the potato, it gets pretty slippery. So you got to be careful and grip that potato pretty tightly so it doesn't go flying out of your hand. Okay, so I just finished up peeling the potato with the peeler. A second way that you can peel a potato is with a paring knife. When I peel this way, I choke way up on my knife so that my pointer finger is over the blade and I'm going to cut toward my thumb. This takes a little bit of practice, but if you keep practicing, you'll get better at it each time you do it. The trick here is to try to not take any more of the flesh of the potato than you have to. You probably do take a little bit more flesh with a paring knife method than you do with the peeler, but it's convenient. Don't have to get a separate tool. So I kind of like using a paring knife sometimes. So that's that method. And then for the rest of these potatoes, I'll probably just clean up some of the spots that don't look so good. And then I'll just leave the skin on them because I know it's pretty good for you. Okay, so my technique when I'm cutting a potato, I want to cut it in half so I have a flat side to go down on my board. Put that flat side down. Depending on how big your potato is, you might want to cut it into 2 or 3 kind of stick pieces, and then you can just go the opposite direction. I'm not being very detailed here, but I would say that my size is approximately a medium dice, approximately 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch. Okay, so the next thing that I'll work with here are my carrots. And I noticed that they have some pretty yucky spots. The rest of the carrot really is fine. It's just that very end. So I'm just gonna go around, clean these up a little bit. And then depending on how they look, you can peel them. If they're looking really good, you don't have to peel them. These are looking a little bit sad on the outside, so I might peel them up just a little bit more. And really, I'm just peeling it the same way I peeled the potato, just taking that very outer layer of skin off. Next, we're going to cut the carrots into rondelles. Basically, that's just a round shape. And depending on the thickness of your carrot, you can stop cutting into rondelles when they start to get really big, if it's too big for a spoon. And then what you can do is to cut that carrot piece in half, and then lay those flat sides down, and then just kind of cut a half moon shape. Again, you want to cut it in half, lay the flat side down so that you're not rolling all over your board. Make it safer for yourself. The next thing that we're going to do is cook 1 pound of ground beef. The ground beef that I purchased at school is in thin sheets so that it will thaw quickly. And then it's separated by pieces of paper, like parchment paper, so that you can pull the 1 pound pieces off easily. So I've just got that in a large pan here. We're going to brown this ground beef until we don't see any more pink. We're just going to kind of chop at it with a turner until it's broken down into small pieces.
Okay, so for every cup of water in here, we're gonna put a teaspoon of this in the bowl. And so we have 4 cups. I'm just gonna
Scrape it on the side of the container.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you can just kind of stir that around in there to get it to come off, or even kind of scrape at it with your spoon. And so what we're making here is chicken broth. So 1 teaspoon of the soup base paste with 1 cup of water makes 1 cup of chicken broth. I think it's best if you just stir it down in there, Corinne. We're just gonna stir until it's all mixed together, and then that will be chicken broth or chicken stock that your recipe calls for. Okay, you can see that we're almost done with the ground beef. We're almost to the point where it has no more pink, and we're just going to then drain off the fat through a colander or a strainer. Okay, so the next step is to take the same pan that you cooked the ground beef in and melt 1 tablespoon of butter into that pan. And then once the butter is melted in the bottom, Then we're going to add the vegetables that we cut, the potatoes, carrots, onions, and celery. We're going to saute them. So we're just going to saute these vegetables until they're slightly tender.
Okay.
All right, to the sauteing vegetables, we're going to add a teaspoon of parsley. And because it's not a big deal, I'm going to visually do, my spoon doesn't fit down into, hang on. All right. So we're going to do a half a teaspoon of basil flakes. We're just going to add those to the vegetables and then continue to saute. The heat and the oil from the butter will help to bring out the flavors of the parsley and the basil. Okay, so we need 8 ounces of processed American cheese. This block is a 16-ounce block, so Corinne is going to cut it in half. You could also count up to 8 by the 2-ounce marks on the block.
And that's easy because you can just count 2, 4, 6, 8.
Yep. Okay.
And I've already made a mark there.
Yep. So go ahead and cut it in half, and then we're going to slice back and forth, kind of slide. Watch your fingers though. Ooh. It's really sticky. That's the hard part about processed American cheese is it has a really sticky consistency. So we're going to pull it out of the wrapper and just try to chop it up into small pieces.
Man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just gonna take this piece.
Okay. So pull it out of the wrapper and then just try to chop it up into small pieces. And it's going to be difficult to chop. Some recipes tell you to grate it on a grater. Don't do it. It's a disaster. It's so soft that it really just smashes everywhere and it makes a mess. So honestly, cutting it with a knife into small pieces is the best idea. And the reason why you want to cut it into small pieces is so that it melts more quickly into your bechamel sauce that you're making.
You feel this?
The smaller the pieces are, the quicker they melt. And so because dairy products, including processed American cheese, can curdle or scorch pretty easily, you want to cook it for as short of an amount of time as possible. So you can see how soft of a texture this is here. Corinne is probably struggling a little bit with that knife because that's just how it is. We're going to do the best that we can to get this broken down into smaller pieces.
Ooh. It's collecting up on my knife.
Yep, you can push it off the knife on the side.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, see how sticky it is?
This is not working.
Don't let it fall off of the side of the board, please. Okay, so we're just going to continue this process. We'll show you our finished product here in a minute. Okay, so now we're getting to the place where if you kind of keep cutting, it just pushes it back together. This is about as small as we can get, and then what I'll probably do as I add it into the bechamel sauce, I will pull it into smaller pieces or kind of break it down as we put it in. So these vegetables have been sauteing in the pan for about 10 minutes, and at this point we're going to add the 4 cups of chicken broth that we prepared from the chicken soup base and water. So you can go ahead and add all of that in. And then we will stir.
Oh,
goodness.
Oh. That is so...
Okay. We'll stir to combine. And then we will put a lid on this and allow this to come up to a boil. Okay, so now the most important part of the cheeseburger soup, the reason why we make it is that we're going to make a bechamel sauce and then turn that bechamel sauce into a cheese sauce. So the first step of making a bechamel sauce is to melt butter or fat in a pan. In this case, we've got 3 tablespoons of butter. We're just going to stir this around until it's melted. Okay, So now that this butter is almost all the way melted, the next step in making a bechamel sauce is to add flour. Usually, depending on the thickness of the bechamel sauce that you're making, usually a good rule of thumb is that you have the same amount of flour, unless you want to make a thin white sauce or a thick white sauce. In this case, we've got 3 tablespoons of butter and 1/4 of a cup of flour. So 1/4 of a cup of flour is 4 tablespoons. So we've got a little bit more flour than butter in this case. So it's going to make a thicker bechamel sauce. So we're going to stir, stir, stir. And what we now have in this pan is what we call a roux, R-O-U-X. That is a cooked paste of flour and fat. And so we want to cook this for a minute or 2 to get the raw starch flavor out of the flour. So we're just going to allow this to cook for a little bit. So to the roux, we're going to add 1/4 of a teaspoon of pepper and 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. 3/4 of a teaspoon, we're going to add 1/2 of a teaspoon and 1/4 of a teaspoon together to make 3/4 of a teaspoon. Once that gets stirred up into the roux, then we're going to add our milk. And this is what makes the roux a bechamel sauce. So we've got 1.5 cups of milk here that we're going to pour in while we stir to the roux. And we're going to continue stirring that until it thickens up. That's probably going to take a couple of minutes here, so we'll come back. Okay, so we can see here that we're thickening slightly. We have not bubbled yet, but it started to steam. So the process of gelatinization is happening where that flour is absorbing the milk that we put in there and making this mixture just a little bit thicker. Maximum gelatinization will happen when this starts to bubble. Once this starts to bubble, we're going to put in the cheese that we cut up earlier. And I think I'm going to try as I go to put in, to break it up as I put it in. So we can definitely see that the bechamel sauce is getting quite a bit thicker here.
It feels so, like a minute ago it was like...
Okay, all I see are hands, so we gotta move. We gotta move because all I see are hands. Okay, so it's definitely thick at this point. So we're going to start putting in the pieces of processed American cheese. And it's so soft. I thought I was gonna be able to break it up into pieces as I go, but it's so soft, it's hard to do. Okay, Corinne, can you stir with your other hand because all I see is your hand.
No,
Okay,
I'm
move
horrible
this.
at stirring with
This
my left hand.
Okay, so we're going to turn the heat down a little bit because we don't want to curdle or scorch. And we do want to allow this cheese a chance to melt into the bechamel sauce. So just as a reminder, the bechamel sauce is a mother sauce. And then when we add cheese, we turn that into a cheese sauce, which is a small sauce made from the mother sauce. Okay, so we've gotten the cheese incorporated into the bechamel sauce, and it's pretty smooth at this point. Okay, so at this point, the vegetables have been bubbling away in the chicken stock, and they have gotten tender. And we're gonna reduce the heat to pretty low temperature here because we don't want to curdle the cheese sauce that's going in here. So Corinne is going to take the cheese sauce and pour it into the vegetables. Okay, careful. Yep, just set it on the stovetop, it's fine. Off of the burner.
Okay, yeah, I'll just do it like that. Okay. So I'm just gonna pour it. Oops.
Yep, just pour it. We'll stir it all around. It doesn't really matter. And then we want to scrape out that pan with a rubber scraper. Okay, careful here. This pan is really hot, so please be careful. So next we're going to stir in the cooked ground beef. again, we're just gonna get this mixed up really well. And then the last ingredient to go in is 1/4 cup of sour cream. And again, just like with any dairy product, the cheese or the bechamel that we have in here, we want to make sure we have our heat on low at this point because we don't want to curdle or scorch the dairy products. The last step is to stir in the 1/4 cup of sour cream. So just stir until that's combined. Okay, so we garnished it with a pickle just to kind of be funny here, and Cameron's going to taste it for the first time.
Oh, hot.
Do you like it? Is it creamy?
Mm-hmm.
A little bit thick texture because of the bechamel sauce that we turned into a cheese sauce that's in there. What about with the pickle? Is it good with the pickle? Like, take a bite of the soup and then take a bite of the pickle. Or mix it or whatever.
Can't cut it.
Just take a bite. Careful though, it's hot, remember?
Crunchy. I can hear it's crunchy.
Is the richness of the soup offset by the acid of the pickle? Is it a good combo?
Yeah.
It's okay? All right.